cannot tell you how excited I am to be speaking to the one and only Dave Steele. Hi, Dave.
Hey, thank you very much for inviting me to be here and yeah, talk to you about all these things that have been happening. So yeah.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. I know you're a hard man to get hold of because you have been doing so much. And we've just been having a little chat on the tip of the iceberg of the things that you've been doing. So I can't thank you enough for your time today, David.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to dive straight in. And one thing we've actually not covered in our videos as yet is retinitis pigmentosa, or the short-term RP.
Yep.
Which is obviously something that you are diagnosed with yourself, aren't you, Dave?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. I just want to first start with, when were you first diagnosed with RP?
So it's a bit of a strange one. This officially, I was diagnosed at the beginning of 2014, and I was 38 at the time. But the first time I heard about RP was when I was about 11 years old. My sister was actually the first one to be diagnosed with it in the early 80s, and she went to Moorfields, and they told her at the time, because they didn't really know a lot about RP back then, it was quite a newly discovered condition. They told her, you've got this thing called retinitis pigmentosa, there's no treatment or cure, you're probably going to go blind. Oh, and by the way, don't have kids. They advised her not to have children because it's hereditary, which was just shocking. Wow. But yeah, so I remember going to an eye hospital. I think it was probably Manchester Eye Hospital. In fact, I was younger than that, probably about 7 years old when this happened. And I remember getting drops put into my eyes, which I now know are dilating drops, which they use quite a lot when I go to appointments. And my vision being a bit blurry and being a bit scared of not being able to see anything. But then after that, it wasn't really spoke of in my family. I was just told that we had this thing called retinitis pigmentosa in the family. And if it was going to affect me, it wouldn't affect me until I was much, much older. And I kind of just got on and forgot about it. And it wasn't until probably my early 20s that I had the first signs of it. I was working as a singer and I had the night blindness aspect. So the first stage of RP is you struggle with light to dark places and light sensitivity. So working as a singer, sometimes walking from a brightly lit room into a dark room or vice versa, I would struggle to adjust. It'd take me a little bit longer than the normally sighted person. But other than that, it wasn't really affecting me. And I just kind of got on with things. I worked abroad as a singer, working on cruise ships and enjoying my kind of younger life. And it wasn't until kind of my late 30s where I used to get myself checked every couple of years just to make sure I was okay with driving and things like that. And I walked into a routine eye exam, and when they looked into the back of my eyes, they said that there'd been a big change since the last time they saw me, and that there was a lot of pigmentation on the retinas, and I needed to stop driving immediately and be referred to a retinal specialist. And a week later, I was diagnosed as being severely sight impaired, legally blind, and my whole world changed.
Wow, that's incredible. Crikey, what an absolute change to go through. I mean, obviously you've just touched on the fact that RP is it can be generic. You mentioned that your sister had it. So is this like, is it gone further back than your sister, or is it likely to go forward into your children as well? Yeah,
absolutely. It's I've had, obviously, when I started going down the process of being officially diagnosed, we had genetic counselling done, and so the gene mutation had been identified, and for the first time, and so I know now what we have in my family is what they call autosomal dominant. So it's a clear trace. It's a 1 in 2 every time. It comes from my mum's side. My mum is now completely blind with RP. I have like uncles and stuff who are, who have lost their sight as well. But it is a clear trace 1 in 2 every time. So with my son, who is now 8 years old, Austin, there's a 1 in 2 chance that he will lose his sight when he's older. And with my daughter, Ellie, who's nearly 14, same with her. But with the type that we have, we know the carriers, but it doesn't normally show those first stages of that night blindness aspect until late teens, early 20s. So it's kind of like a waiting game. We've just got to kind of wait and see. But that also is part of why I do what I do now, and inspires me to show them actually that, if you do get affected by vision loss in the future, there's still so many things in the world you can do.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, with obviously a lot of your family members being affected by this, you can actually support each other, relate to each other as to what you're going through as well.
In honesty, I'd say in most cases, yes. Not unfortunately with my family. Quite the opposite. And I have spoke to a lot of people around the world who kind of have this experience. I've actually lost a lot of family for it. And don't speak to a lot of my family now because they kind of shunned me when I started to lose my sight. And it's often the case, and I've spoken to a lot of people where people will lose close friends and sometimes family, in these kind of circumstances. But yeah, I think for a lot of families, I think, if you have low vision and blindness within your family, it should be a reason to kind of grow closer together. But it doesn't always happen that way.
Not necessarily the case every time, no.
No.
So just going back to obviously when you were starting to get fully diagnosed with RP,
Sure.
How did it kind of put pressure on maybe the job that you were doing? Obviously, a lot is going to change for you, a lot of different changes. So what kind of challenges did you face? And
wow. Okay. So yeah, I mean, really extreme. Obviously, I'd like to state very, very clearly, this isn't the case for everyone, but it's for a lot of people. So when I was officially diagnosed, I was working in car sales at the time, and I was also working as a singer. When I told my employer that I was being diagnosed with RP and being made severely sight impaired and I could no longer drive, they let me go because I could no longer do test drives anymore. I couldn't do my gigs anymore, so I wasn't able to do my singing and drive around. My daughter lives in Glasgow, and I used to drive 3.5 hours of a weekend on a Friday and a Sunday to bring her down for the weekend, and I couldn't do that anymore. I had to rely on my wife to do it. We applied for support within the benefit system, and at that time there was a 9-month waiting list for personal independence payment to get through that process. And all the while we couldn't get the support, we fell into debt. We couldn't afford the rent in the house we were staying in, so we ended up having to move into social housing and lost our house. We had to feed our kids on food parcels for a little while, because we were really struggling to try and get the support that was out there. So there was this nightmare process that so many people with disabilities go through, where you are having to kind of fill out forms and go through a process where, especially with personal independence payment, where you were being put into limbo for so many months and then having to prove your disability. It was a horrible thing to go through. So for the first 8 or 9 months, I really struggled while we were going through this. I felt responsible not only for the sight that I was losing and what that was doing to my family. My son was only a few months old at the time. We were saving to get married. I just proposed on the Christmas day, and I got registered legally blind the following April. We'd set a date for New Year's Eve to get married of 2014, and we were saving, and everything kind of fell apart. And my wife really kind of was picking up the pieces for a little while, but so I was feeling anxious and struggling with depression for all that, plus the financial pressure was put on my family as well. So it was a really tough time for a while, and I became very isolated because of it.
Yeah, I can imagine isolation is an absolutely massive part of being diagnosed with sight loss. So what I want to talk to you about now is obviously what you're doing now is miles away from that. And obviously you found something, didn't you, to help you pull out of that dark place and come into where you are now. So how did this all begin?
God, it was my savior. As I said, so as we just left off with that question, for a good kind of 8 or 9 months, I was really struggling. And then my sister, who, as I said, was the first one to be diagnosed with RP, said to me, the best way for you to come to terms with what you're going through is actually to speak to other people. Because often when you get that kind of diagnosis, it's done in a very kind of cold and clinical, very matter-of-fact kind of way. And speaking to other people who are going through the same thing, living and breathing it, is the best way, often, to get information and really understand what you're going through. So I did that. I joined some support groups online on Facebook and started to speak to people. And then where it all started to turn around for me was I got asked to attend a support group, a physical kind of in-person support group in Newcastle for people with RP and another condition called Usher syndrome, which for those of you that don't know is deaf blindness. So the same sight loss as RP, but with hearing loss as well. And when they heard that I previously worked as a singer, they said to me, would I be the entertainment for the support group that day and come and sing some songs? And immediately I said yes, because I was really nervous about going to this support group for the first time and being around other people who were losing their sight like me or had lost their sight, because it was like a glimpse into the future. Seeing people using canes and having guide dogs absolutely terrified me, especially at that time when I was feeling very anxious and struggling with depression. And immediately when they said, you know, come and be the singer, to me, that was my comfort zone. Still to this day, being on stage, speaking to people like you is where I'm confident and very natural. But where I get nervous is just the day-to-day things that most people kind of take for granted. Going out to a new place, getting the bus, going on a train, traveling somewhere, being in a crowded place, all those kind of things. So where it all changed was, and it was like a very kind of defining moment, a eureka moment for me. The night before going to this event to sing for this support group, I was in bed. I was going over songs to sing, and I thought it'd be a great idea if I could take a song that everyone knows and change the words and talk about my experience so far with my low vision. So I chose the song Stand By Me by Benny King, because I love the opening line of when the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, because that was like the night blindness part of RP. So I rewrote the lyrics in bed in about 20 minutes. And I remember turning to my wife and saying to her, I've just had this idea and I think it's going to change everything for us as a family. And I went to the support group the following day. And when I sang that song, the room just changed. People were, some were in tears. People were coming up and shaking my hand afterwards and saying that the words that I'd written was able to describe how they'd always felt about their journeys with blindness and low vision. And I always say when I'm talking about this, that when I was diagnosed, I went through a lot of those things that most people go through in those first kind of early stages of a diagnosis, not just with RP, but all with sight loss, but with any kind of disability. I went through a loss of independence. I went through a loss of confidence, pride. But the biggest thing it kind of took from me was my purpose. I didn't know where my place was in the world anymore. And all of a sudden, when I got that response from singing that song and what people were saying about my words, it was like I found my purpose again. And all of a sudden, I just started to write poetry, because music and poetry are the same thing to me. Every single day, sharing everything that I was going through, the good days, the bad days. I was going to bear it all in the hope that I could have that same kind of impact I had in that room. And I just started posting poetry onto these support groups. And every time I did it, I started to get messages from all over the world, people saying to me that they were using my words as a way for them to describe to their loved ones how they were feeling when they couldn't find the words themselves. So it was just, I was blown away. Yeah,
it's amazing, because you've obviously found that connection, and that you can pass your experiences on through poetry and through your music and through your books as well. I'm going to put work aside a minute, and I want to ask you, what do you like to do? Because obviously you've talked about things that do actually, you do have the fear factor about, but what things do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, a few things. Obviously, I've got a young family, so I love spending time with my wife and our children, and my guide dog Christopher. I love reading stories with Austin, my youngest. We do this thing, we've done it since he was 2 years old. We do Facebook Live bedtime stories from my kind of Facebook personal account page, and people tune in from all over the world with their kids and listen to the bedtime stories. Wow. And I read a lot of Julia Donaldson stories, like the Gruffalo and Stickman and like that.
Love those.
Because they're all poetry stories. And similar to my poetry, the good thing about those kind of stories is when I'm having a bad eye day and I can't see the words, it's like a song. I memorize them. Like song lyrics, it's amazing how many song lyrics we know. So I'm able to read these books to him no matter how little I can see. And I've done that since he was 2 years old. So I do that. I go to the gym. I train at the gym lifting weights kind of like most days. I find that that's one thing that really kind of keeps me going, because it's a good thing for stress, and it also has a massive effect on my vision as well. When I'm not training and eating rubbish, my eyes get worse. But when I'm looking after myself, I find like I'm not having as many bad eye days as I normally would.
Right. Yeah. Oh wow. Okay. So obviously, you're advising people to stick with a healthy exercise and a good diet, and
Makes a massive difference. It does.
Yeah.
You know, I really I can see the difference when I'll have like, you know, weeks where I'll train really good, and then like something will happen, like I'll have, you know, a busy time with work or something will get in the way, and then everything goes to pot and you start eating takeaways, and it does,
crazy.
yeah, absolutely, it does make a massive difference. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's certainly something. Just get out, walk.
Yeah.
It
is amazing what walking does for you. I'd agree with that, because obviously I take my dog for walks all the time, and I find that it's making the effort, and I think, oh come on, and then once I'm out there and I'm doing it, I feel so much better when I've got back.
Definitely, it's just that first step of getting outside out the door for most people. There's so many excuses we can make, but when we get out there, I walk literally just over 10 miles most days. I'll walk my son to school in the morning, and then walk to the gym, which is a good couple of miles, and work out at the gym, and then walk back, and then walk to school and pick him up and walk back again. And I'm doing, you know, probably about 15,000 steps a day.
And then afterwards, yeah.
Actually, more than that. It's about 18 actually. But yeah, so but it does make a difference.
At night time, then I bet.
Oh god, yeah.
Bless you. So I just want to come back to your book tour now.
Sure.
Obviously, I've done a lot of research on your website and everything, and I know that you're huge in America. I'd like to know.
Do you know why that is? I got to interrupt there. Do you know what it is? Right, people ask me all the time.
Yeah.
It's a really strange thing. When I started writing the poetry, I was posting it everywhere on lots of support groups, and my first book, when that came out, it and same with the other two as well. All three of them, they were #1 releases on Amazon in America and Australia. And I think the reason is, here in the UK, we're a little bit more reserved about talking about feelings.
I'd agree.
We're a bit stiff upper lip and all that kind of thing. People are a bit more insular, whereas in America, the complete opposite. They tend to overshare with stuff. You know, they are very, very open. So I think my kind of, you know, the stuff that I talk about in the poetry has always resonated more. And, you know, getting to actually, after all these years, when I went out for the first USA book tour in 2019, getting to go out there and actually meet some of these people was an incredible experience.
I can imagine. Whereabouts in America have you been so far?
So the book tour, I've been a few times since, but with the book tour we did in 2019. I was there for like 3 weeks, and we did the East Coast. So we started off in Baltimore, and then some place in Pennsylvania, and then up to New York, and then to Rhode Island and Boston, Philadelphia as well. In DC, I was on TV in DC on the local news there. And we did some amazing events kind of just based around me and my books, and we did some events for some of the major sight loss charities. We did some events for some assistive technology companies, and just, you know, getting to meet people, and some of the stories I could tell you from it. We had an incredible time. One particular thing I'm really proud of was when I did my first book, Stand By Me RP, I was getting messages from people all over, as I said, but I got a message from this family in a place called Amarillo in Texas about this little girl called Jackie Wilson. Great name. And she was 5 years old, Jackie, at the time, and she has RP, but she has X-linked RP, so she was losing her sight quite aggressively at the age of 5.
Oh, bless.
And she also has this other condition called Best's disease, and that means that you're losing your peripheral at the same time as losing your central as well. So she's the only person in the world to be diagnosed with both these conditions. And she was being bullied at school for using a cane. And a mum had been reading my first book to her as a way for her to kind of understand what she was going through at 5. And she'd used a couple of lines in one of the poems to come back at these bullies. And so my mum had messaged me and told me about it. So I immediately got in touch, and we spoke on the phone, we did FaceTime calls, and then she took a real dip with her vision and was really struggling. So I wrote a poem for her, called it Jackie, talking about how amazing she is and why she needs to be in the world. And I put it in Stand By Me RP Volume 2 without telling her. And when the book came out, I sent her a copy and then called her the day she received it. And she went skipping into school. I'm in a book. Anyway, so when we did the tour in 2019, she was now, 10? and they brought her all the way from Texas. The first time the family had ever left the state, they brought her all the way to Baltimore to see me speak at the National Federation for the Blind's annual conference. And I got to spend time with her. She sat on my knee and I read her poem for her, and it was just incredible. So we did lots of things like that. It was just amazing.
Yeah, and that is obviously all the work that you're doing shows you the rewards. You're definitely reaping the rewards for that, aren't you? I bet you felt incredible after that.
Yeah, I mean, loads of things like that. I got invited to a veterans concert, a Veterans Day concert for Veterans Weekend in Baltimore. And initially, they just asked me to attend as a special guest. And at the last moment, they asked me to read a piece of poetry. And I went on stage and read a piece of poetry to 600 veterans, Marines in full dress uniform. They had a male gospel Marine choir and all this sort of stuff on. And a lot of these soldiers had dealt with things like PTSD and anxiety and a lot of the things that I was talking about in my poetry. And I got a full standing ovation from all these like Marines and the army. And it was, you know, moments like that. It was literally goosebumps. Incredible. So yeah, never take it for granted.
Blimey, no. Are you recording all these moments? Because I bet you'd love to.
Every single thing in here.
Yeah.
There's one more I'll quickly tell you from the story. I've got to touch on this because it's really important. Really important. I was in a Rhode Island college, which is just outside of Boston. And I was doing 2 events at the college, and I was doing one session in the afternoon and a session in the evening. And the session was for an hour, I would speak about my story, read some poetry, and then do a Q&A and do a book signing. So the first session in the afternoon, I'm doing the talk, and all the way through the talk, there's a guy in the room, in the audience, who's drawing my attention. There's something about him that I kept looking over at him, and he looked kind of out of place. He was wearing like a high-vis jacket, like he come straight from work. He was in his late 20s. There's just something about him. Anyway, during the book signing, he's in the queue, people's getting books, and he comes up to me, and I said, "Pleased to meet you. My name's Dave. What's your name?" And he says, "Hi, it's Derek." I said, "Hi, Derek. So what brings you here today?" And he says, "I was just diagnosed with RP on Monday." And this was Wednesday. And I was like, oh man. So just come over here a second. So I took him out away from the side of the table, sat down at another table and said, "What's going on? Tell me your story." And he said, "Well, I thought I had cataracts. I went to an optician. They looked in the back of my eyes. They said, 'We think you've got this thing called RP. There's no treatment or cure. Your kids might have it,' because he's got like 3 kids. And he was just kind of went out from that appointment, very matter of fact, head spinning, trying to come to terms, angry, sad, going through all the emotions, went home, jumped online, started researching RP, found one of my poems. And when he was reading it, he was in floods of tears, he told me, because it was making sense to a lot of things that had kind of happened to him and a lot of things he was going through before he was diagnosed. And anyway, that day he was in work and his wife called him and she said, "You're never going to believe this, but Dave Steele's in America. And not only is he in America, he's in Rhode Island." And he walked straight out of his work and came straight to see me. And that's why he was stood there in a high-vis jacket. And I was like, and he was telling me this. And I had goosebumps, and we're still in touch. We speak every week. Yeah, it's really cool.
I was like, it was meant to be, wasn't it? Like there was.
I was saying before we did this, when we were talking before the interview, it's very spooky how, like, since I started doing this, right place, right time.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, the reason I came across you was, again, because of your poetry, because obviously I follow a lot of things on YouTube. And I think it was the fact that you'd popped up on a suggested, and I just started listening to your poetry, and it's so relatable, so understandable. And because obviously you as a person, you come across so warm, and it's just so nice. Do you know what I mean? So
I'm a great believer
that has.
I'm a great believer that everything happens for a reason. I think that's one of the things that this taught me. And not to go too much into kind of my early life before I was diagnosed, but I'm very, very open about it. And if there's anything you'd like to ask, please feel free. But there were times in my younger kind of life, late teens, early 20s, where I was homeless. I attempted suicide a few times, really, really struggled with lots of things. So when it came to actually the part of my life where I was being diagnosed with RP, even though I struggled for that 8 or 9 months, I found that the scars from my previous kind of experiences actually reminded me of all that I could cope with, and it gave me the ability to talk about them in the way that I do. And even my singing, you know, that gave me the ability to write the poetry. So, you know, taking the things that have really caused us pain in the past and remembering that actually these things we've survived and they can help us going forward has been a massive thing for me.
Yeah, well, your strengths are clearly helping to make those when they feel weak a lot stronger as well. So you're truly an inspiration. You really, really are. God bless you. I just want to touch on, obviously a lot of people are maybe thinking about, you know, like assistive tech and things that you might actually use to help and aid you with RP on a daily basis. So is there anything in particular that you tend to use?
Yeah, I've got a few things. So I'm a big Apple geek as far as I'm concerned. Apple tech for me, it's just very easy to use. So I've got I'm talking to you on my iPhone 12 Pro Max, which I only upgraded. I actually did some work with Apple on this. I've been very lucky enough to actually work with Apple. They've developed, the good thing about Apple for me is actually embedded within the company, they have a lot of visually impaired people. Their head of PR for the whole of America has also got RP. And when they brought out the 12 Pro Max, even though it's not the new phone anymore because the 13 just came out, it's got this thing in it called people detection, which through the LiDAR lens of the camera can tell you how far you are away from people. So not only is it great for navigating through anywhere in low light because it'll warn you with haptics, vibrations or sound, it also helps people with social distancing for those people that have felt difficult, you know, anxious about going out during the pandemic. I didn't work my guide dog for the whole of the pandemic because he didn't know how to socially distance. But with my phone, I could use that. So, you know, I've got that. I've got my iPad. I've got some great things that I use for my cane, different rollerballs, and I've got an LED cane as well, which lights up at the bottom, which is pretty cool. I have different glasses that kind of help me as well. Two friends of mine who are quite big in America have got their own firm called Two Blind Brothers, have created these great sunglasses that kind of they're great, they're really nice. Brad and Brian, they were on the Ellen show. She gave them like a big check a few years back, and they've got a non-for-profit clothing brand that where all the proceeds go to Foundation Fighting Blindness out in America. And they made these sunglasses that are created actually by other visually impaired people, and they're double coated on both sides. So they're really good for filtering out the light and stuff like that, and make it so they're not too dark but not too bright. They're just perfect for people with like retinal diseases, and I kind of use them all the time. So yeah, there's lots of things. There's lots of great tech out there to find, and obviously Optilec. You know, you talk about you guys. I remember having my assessment when I was first diagnosed in those very early days, and getting the glasses. And lots of other different pieces of tech, and it, you know, there's so many simple things that can make such a massive difference to your day-to-day life, and still there is a gap that needs bridging with that. Too many people, I talked about the Apple devices, there's so many things in those that people don't realize is actually in them, and so much tech out there that can really make a difference.
Yep, I absolutely agree. Speaking of lots of things coming out, have you got anything new that you want to tell us about?
Certainly have. Yes, I have. So proud of this. So I'll tell you a brief story of how it came about. We talked about Julia Donaldson, author of The Gruffalo and everything else. A couple of years ago, she did an article, and I think it was in The Guardian, on World Book Day, which is that day where all the kids go to school dressed as their favourite character and take a book in. Sure, you know that.
Oh, yeah.
And in this article, she turned around, she said, there needs to be more children with disabilities featured in children's stories. And as soon as I read that article, I went, yeah, there does. And I wrote the first 6 stories in a new series of children's books in one night. It just literally went, came out. So I wanted to write a series of books, and I'm very, very excited about this first book coming out this month and where these stories are going to go. But the concept is, and there's nothing else out there like it because it's done in that poetic style. It's about a young visually impaired boy based on my son, Austin. He's called Austin in the story. And his best friend, who's his guide dog, based on my guide dog, Christopher. But in this book, he's called Joe, because that's what Austin wanted him called.
Aww.
And it's about them going to a mainstream primary school, and about their day-to-day lives and all the challenges they face and all their interactions with other children. And these books are designed to help give children with low vision and blindness, but also children with disabilities in general, a character they can really relate to, but also break down those social barriers that a lot of them face within schools with peer groups and everything else and other friends, and also help other children to kind of understand that these kids are just like them. And at the end of each book, there is a set of questions, open-ended questions, where kids can put themselves in the shoes of Austin and talk about how they would feel. So they've been designed to be used in school as well as part of the lesson.
That's really cool.
The illustrator I've worked with on these books, who's an amazing illustrator, Sue Green. She's actually a primary school teacher herself. So we've worked with the schools, and the way this is going to go in the future is we're going to have this world that Austin's in these stories be like any other school that you'd walk into. So we're going to talk about things like autism, ADHD, anxiety, wheelchair use, all these things, and normalize them through that art of poetry and tell that story. My wife's sister had a son called Josh, who just passed away about a month ago with a condition called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a terminal muscle wasting disease. He was 18. And when I first told her about these books, she said to me, I wish there'd have been something like this for Josh when he was that age. So one of the books in the future, which I just started to write a couple of nights ago, I've not told anyone this yet, I've put a young Josh in the story. And he meets Austin, and Austin helps him integrate in the school when he comes into the classroom, and helps him find friends and be kind to him. And it's just showing those lessons to kids, which I think is really going to help so many people. And I can't wait for people to start reading these.
You have such a beautiful mind, Dave. You really, really do.
Thank you.
Do. Are you able to share just a little snippet of your new book with us? I
certainly can. I'd say this is a world exclusive, but it's not, because I did it last week for the very first time on RNIB radio. Okay. I was on there for National Poetry Day and shared this. So this is a second time world exclusive for you guys. Okay. But I'll read a little bit for you now. This is kind of the opening introduction into Austin's world and setting up the story. In a little town not far from here, there's a boy that you might know. His name is Austin Steele, and his guide dog friend named Joe. Each day they take adventures as they travel around the world. And here within these pages is how their story first unfurled. When Austin was just 5, his sight began to disappear. But like his dad, he wasn't sad and felt no need to fear. For Austin's dad had shown him that the vision in his mind could overcome the obstacles of slowly going blind. His tunnel view was shrinking, independence getting tough. Some days the outside world felt far too hard, he'd had enough. But with a paw, what once unsure became a strength to grow, returning pride for by his side, a friend in guide dog Joe. Now Austin feels amazing, and he knows that he can be absolutely anything despite what he can't see. Now with the little he has left, each day is filled with pride. The busy places once had feared with Joe no longer shied. Though people stare, they couldn't care, just smile and say hello to Austin Steele and his best friend, his guide dog, who's named Joe.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It's just a snippet, goes on from there.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So is that available in book form, audio, download?
Yep. So it's available to pre-order right now from my website, which is theblindpoet.net. You can pre-order it now. It's coming out very, very shortly. To make it completely accessible, the audio version is going to be free with every purchase of a download, every purchase of the book from the site. So all the books are in large print. And specifically designed with people with low vision in mind. Every single illustration within the book has a section above it, which is an image description. So you can image describe every single picture that's in it. But the audio description, the audio book, as I said, is going to be a free download to make it completely accessible. And we'll have a Braille version as well, which we're working on at the moment.
Perfect. Love it. Love it. Really do. What I want to come now to a close is obviously there's going to be lots and lots of people out there who are feeling isolated. They are feeling closed off, a loss of independence. What advice could you give them just as a starting point?
Couple of things. So first of all, don't be too hard on yourself when you're having bad days. It's perfectly natural to feel the way you do. Talk to other people, as I said right at the beginning. But the best advice I can give, and I'd like to give it you in the style of a poem, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
because I wrote this poem beginning of last year when I was talking to a lot of people about how they were feeling during the pandemic, of really struggling with isolation and anxiety and things like that, and how to really deal with those things. And the best way for me to talk to people is through that poem. So this is what a poem that I read often now. It's called Blind Perceptions. And I hope a lot of the people out there listening to this will really feel these words and get the meaning.
Yeah.
I know there's strength inside of you, though all you feel is numb. Don't be afraid as eyesight fades for what is still to come. You will adjust. In these words, trust. We share these tunneled eyes, a mix of strength and anxiousness. The same in me applies. My shins are full of bruises and my confidence misplaced. At times, self-isolated, felt the world too much to face. But I'm here to remind you, all the times we fail don't matter. There's lots of misconceptions still. Let's remind them of the latter. It's not that complicated. Change how blindness is defined. Let's educate, articulate the many ways we're blind. It's never all or nothing, many shades and different views. Yet there's this stereotype they keep on printing in the news. No wonder some of us have fears when out in crowded place. They see the cane but can't explain why we look them in the face. There's some of us who stay at home, convinced of the excuse that because we don't look blind enough, there's a need to be recluse. Don't waste your life on people whose opinions are way off. Just swipe your cane with courage. Hold your head with pride aloft. So never doubt what we're about, despite what some believe. Come join me on my mission and change the way we are perceived. I won't let the haze that fills my eyes consume the rest of me. There's more to life than edge of knife, despite what I can't see. Try not to care as people stare with looks of vague suspicion. But why should I explain to them the terms of my condition? Though it's much simpler to stay home, won't waste another day. Their pity's just an obstacle that's getting in my way. And though I am blind, won't be confined by others' misconceptions, this poetry that spills from me will change their blind perceptions. Though anxious chest and days depressed have far from disappeared, I've learned to breathe while I still grieve, control these things I feared. My kids look on, not on what's gone, but all each day I teach. For if tomorrow their eyes pay, life's dreams are still in reach. So I'll not cry as vision dies, won't focus on the blur. No point in holding on to how those days and eyes once were.
Wow. I got lost in that. Absolutely. That was beautiful.
Thank
and
you.
you did well to remember it all as well. Crikey.
The singer in me, and so many words.
Yeah. Gosh, no, that's absolutely good. So you wrote that, what, about a year ago, you say?
Yeah, the beginning of the pandemic. I do this weekly kind of webinar, Zoom webinar thing, which has turned into this massive kind of support group worldwide. The Americans have done their thing and labeled it. It's called Tea and Poetry, and it's every Wednesday on Zoom. You can register via my website. But when we first started doing it, before it was called Tea and Poetry, what we did was we spoke about everything that was going on in the world when everything started to shut down and the whole world kind of stopped 18 months ago. It was bizarre. My bags were packed. I was due to fly out to America. I'd been asked to host these things called the annual Helen Keller Achievement Awards, which is this huge award ceremony in America. They had a band for me. I was going to open by singing Stand By Me RP. I was reading poetry throughout it. Incredible event. Previous winners have been Stevie Wonder and, it's Apple. It's amazing. And everything shut and stopped. So we then jumped onto doing things like this, Zoom calls. And the first one we did, which eventually became Tea and Poetry, we just got people to join and we spoke about all the things that we were going through and all the things that we were feeling and how it almost felt like the whole world had stepped into the shoes of someone with a disability, because people were feeling things that people with disabilities have been dealing with for years: anxiety, social isolation, all these kind of things. And then from everyone's kind of feelings, I then took it and made it into a piece of poetry and then debuted it the following week. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And we have this thing called the Tribe now, where all these people tune in from all over the world and we support each other. So yeah, a lot of my poetry, I'll read new stuff every week, and I'm still writing, every day, at least 1, 2.
Well, I'm going to hugely encourage everybody to definitely, we're going to put all your links to your YouTubes and your website and everything. I encourage absolutely everybody to follow Dave Steele, because you are a true inspiration from start to end. And I I bless you with many more years of doing this for people and helping people, David. I can't thank you enough for your time today.
That's my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Sarah.
You take care. Bye-bye.